Howdy High Tides, I'm Jed Hoff from Beach Film News, and yes, I am back. This week is the last week of February, which also means it is the last week of Black History Month. So, I'm here to talk to you about three very important African American men. Number 1, Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson was the first player to break the color barrier of baseball and become the first black professional baseball player. Number 2, George Washington Carver was an agricultural scientist who helped create an alternative to cotton as well as help prevent soil deprecation. Number 3, Martin Luther King, who you should all know, helped end segregation in the 1960s. That is some history, but what about this week in history?
Good morning, High Tides. It's been a while, but it's time to get back to this week in history. First things first, I want to apologize because last week I said that George Harrison was born in 1955 when he was actually born in 1943. Just want to make things clear. Alright, now let's get started. On March 2nd, 1965, the movie version of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical The Sound of Music, starring Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer in the lead roles, had its world premiere in New York. To follow that, on March 2nd, 1962, Jon Bon Jovi was born. He was best known as a musician, songwriter, and actor, and the lead singer and founder of the band Bon Jovi. He has great commercial success, including multiple number ones in the US and around the world, and collected a number of awards including Academy Award, American Music Award, Golden Globe, and a Grammy. His hits include You Give Love a Bad Name, Livin' on a Prayer, Bad Medicine, and I'll Be There For You. Bon Jovi has sold more than 120 million records worldwide. After that, on March 3, 1845, Florida became the 27th state of the United States of America. Spanish Minister D. Luis de Onis and U.S. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams signed the Florida Purchase Treaty, in which Spain agrees to cede the remainder of its old province of Florida to the United States. To conclude this week's segment, on March 7, 2012, people in the United States and several other countries marked the 100th birthday of the ever-popular Oreo cookie. The cookie is credited as the best-selling cookie in the world and has been sold in over 100 countries since it's created in a Nabisco factory in 1912. Well, High Tides, that's it for this week in history. Make sure to check in for the next one, and I will see you later.
1 week in history makeups 7 days. But how do you apply makeup the proper way? Here's a piece about that. First Amendment doesn't talk about makeup, but it does talk about the amendments of free speech. Here's a piece about the restrictions of the First Amendment right to free speech.
Hey, High Tides. If you didn't know, famous actress Gina Carano was fired from the famous TV show, The Mandalorian, for expressing her political opinion on social media. This brought a lot of controversy in whether her being fired was warranted or not. Both sides in this controversy are pointing out different details of this scenario and using it to disprove the other. This controversy is also bringing up a bigger idea. Should a worker's expression of his or her political opinion affect their employment? To try to stay as neutral as possible, we will cover both sides and give their general arguments. To begin, let's look at it from this perspective. When working at Disney, or any company for that matter, you represent the company's morals and values. This is uninventable in today's society, where everyone is connected. We live in a society.
We live in a society.
Should one's political opinions affect their employment?
I think it depends on how they voice their political opinion.
I guess mainly if you represent a company, I guess your political opinions do matter.
I think that really depends on how radical they are and what they're willing to do. But if it's, pretty surface level, no.
Let's say your political opinion had to do with, let's say, abortion rights. And you felt like abortion should not be legal, and you put dead fetuses all over social media and was just obnoxious with it. Then I think maybe. But I just think things should be done tastefully. You can express yourself without being so grotesque and inflammatory.
Do you think that one person in a company can represent the entire company's morals and values?
Yes. Let's say you have one person in a company that has a very radical view, and if the company acknowledges that and they still keep them, it's kind of like they're allowing it.
A company faces themselves off of their employee and company culture, so I think it really does affect.
Let me put it this way. A lot of companies have vision statements, and they expect the employees to move their vision forward and abide by their vision statement. Now, do all employees do that? Typically not. Do I think one person should bear the burden and the weight of that? I really don't, but the president of the company typically does when they're representing the company. So I would say if it's the president, I think that person should be demonstrating the values of the company, but I don't think one person carries all that weight outside of that role.
What is freedom of speech in your opinion?
It's the ability to say things but still receive consequences.
The ability to be able to say what you want to say when you want to say it, but I think a line is drawn when your free speech infringes on me. Am I right?
Freedom of speech is the ability to say what you want and have others respond with what they think as well, whether they agree or disagree. And you also have to respect their right for them to say whatever they want.
You have the ability of free speech. You can say whatever you want to say. I don't really care as long as, it doesn't infringe on you.
What isn't freedom of speech?
When it limits others, so in a way.
Freedom of speech is very different from hate speech. There's many things that you can't say when you're at a certain level or in a certain position because it might be inappropriate, instill fear in the public, or it might cause people to inflict harm on others.
Freedom of speech stops being freedom of speech when you have to adhere to someone's rules that they have no authority over. Like for a company or a service, for example, you may not say these things, and that's completely fine because that's their company and they have the right to tell you to do that. If you're just out and about in public, however, that's where things really start to change.
Would you say the event at the Capitol is an example of freedom of speech?
I think that's an example of an insurrection. I think that's freedom of speech gone too far.
Okay.
They're no longer speaking, they're acting, they're invading the Capitol, they're endangering lives, they're threatening people, they're beating people, they're killing people. That's beyond freedom of speech.
A lot of people still call it a protest, even though it's far from that, especially when you have people carrying Confederate flags and stuff. You could say that it's an example of where freedom of speech kind of falls short and is unfair. It can be skewed depending on who you're giving it to, because freedom of speech also comes with freedom of press, right? That's kind of like in the same amendments and the same, thing. And in press, like there's many ways that they skew the perspective or skew the way that people think about the person depending on maybe their color, and then that now becomes like kind of hate speech at that point.
When is the line drawn between free speech and hate speech?
I think if you ask any person, it's going to be different depending on their experience and depending what they've gone through and stuff. If you have a person that has fallen down into a place that's really bad, because there's little kids who say things that are inappropriate as a joke. They'll say anything. Like they literally say anything. You'll have 14-year-old kids saying the worst possible things they could ever say, and that it would be considered hate speech coming from an adult. And it's obvious for obvious reason. For those kids to be raised that way, you might find that there is a large ignorance that comes with it, to where they're more likely to say things that they wouldn't have if they grew up in a different environment. So I think that we should allow a place for growth, and we should allow people to kind of grow from their stupidity.
When others are silenced, or you cannot receive criticism yourself?
I think that really depends on who you're addressing, because everybody has different opinions of where the line should be drawn. So I think we should be respectful and respect the other person and where they think the line is drawn when you're addressing them.
When your speech is demeaning another culture, race, ethnicity person to the point where you're talking derogatory about them, threatening their life, their security, their person, that's hate speech.
Thank you so much, Ms. Simmons.
Okay, you're welcome. Send a check to my personal mailbox.
Yeah, I got you. Now that we got these people's opinions on this, it's important to know what the First Amendment is and why it matters. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. What do you think of the Gina Carano situation? Did she break the ruling? Should she have been fired? Is it justified? Is it wrong? That's up to you to decide. See you next time.
Well, that was the last segment, which means it's time for everyone's favorite second opinion. Last week, my brother asked you, what's your favorite planet? Your guys' response? Earth. Well, this week's question is, do you think Cavero should have been fired for her actions? Scan that QR code or check out the first link in the description to answer that question. As always, I've been Jed Hoffman. You've been you. See you later, alligator.